The planet is heating up.
The oceans are becoming filled with plastic.
Change starts now.
Change starts now.
We're on a countdown
To zero waste. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
This is the Zero Waste Countdown Podcast. Here's your host, Laura Nash.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Zero Waste Countdown podcast and radio show. On today's episode, we're speaking with Lawrence Speelman all the way over in the UK. He works for Toast Ale, a not-for-profit turning food waste into delicious beer, one of my favorite things to drink in the world. So I'm very excited for this episode because I love beer, and we're going to find out how they do it.
My title is Customer Needs Manager with a K, because Toast loves their bread puns, as you can tell by the name. We're not a very large team, so it has quite a few segments to it. I manage all of the customer service, inbound requests, orders, the entire customer experience from basically first point of contact to delivery of the beers, payment as well, invoices. I also manage the logistics, so I organize all of our deliveries, both wholesale and retail. When I say retail, I mean via website sales. And I also organize all of our inventory, so our stock movement from our brewery to our different warehouses. I also do some admin and support role for our sales team and just for the general office. So quite a diverse role.
That is a huge job description. You must be so busy. And Toast Ale is very special because you guys make a certain sustainable brand of beer where you use bread that's been collected, and you can basically turn bread into beer. So what is it about bread that makes good beer?
Well, bread basically acts as a replacement for the normal carbohydrate sources that you would associate with home brewing. To give you a basic idea, the normal brewing process begins with what's called a mash tun. Now, a mash tun is when you take a large quantity of barley malt. Normally it's barley malt, at least in modern brewing. And you would run this through a vast amount of water, warm water, in fact, hot water, which would basically stew it into a bit like a kind of porridge. And so what that kind of does is it gets the carbohydrate to break down into kind of dissolve into sugars, which you can then run out of the mash tun and begin to ferment using yeast. And I mean, the common misconception or sometimes the misconception I get when people ask me, why do I use bread in beer? Or why does Toast use bread in beer is because they think that it's because of the yeast in the bread. Now, the yeast in the bread is already activated, so it's of no use to us. It's just the bread as a carbohydrate source, i.e. bread will dissolve the same way as barley malt or wheat or rye or anything else that you want to, any other grain or anything that you want to try to ferment alcohol out of. Grapes, obviously, in the case of wine, for example, potatoes with good vodka and so on. And basically, bread will break down, and you can then ferment the sugars that come out of that bread into beer the same way you would malt. And so what we do is we, in order to produce a consistent product, which kind of acts as a contemporary of your average beer, we take 1/3 of the malt out of a normal mash tun and replace that with surplus bread.
Wow. Have you always used bread at the company, or is this a new project?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, it comes with the name, Toast Ale.
Yeah.
Basically, so to give you a little bit of background, Toast was founded in 2016 by a man called Tristram Stewart. I don't know if he's someone you're aware of, but he's definitely someone who is, everyone who's interested in sustainability and in food waste sustainability in general should look up. He's got an incredible TED Talk. He's a best-selling author. He is a global food waste pioneer. And he has basically dedicated his life to fighting the global food waste issue. I mean, food waste as an issue is, I'm sure you've had plenty of guests and so on who've spoken about the issues of food waste, but
it's a big issue, yeah.
Yeah, a massive issue. I mean, I believe it would be the third or fourth largest carbon footprint if it was to be kind of equated as a country. Anyway, it's a massive issue and something that everyone can do something about. Now, Tristram tried a bread beer in Belgium made by the Brussels Beer Project called Babylone. This was in 2015. Brewing with bread is not a new practice at all. Brewing with bread is a very kind of ancient practice, actually. It's been practiced ever since, sort of in the ancient Near East, since about 5,000 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
Which is why Babylone was the name of the beer.
Cool.
And he tried this beer, and he just thought, well, he knew that bread is more or less the number one culprit in terms of food waste, specifically in the UK, where we are. 44% of all bread that's produced in this country gets thrown away. I'm not sure on the figures in America, but I can imagine it's similarly mind-boggling, the amount of bread that does just get thrown away either during production or, just thrown away after being sold or put on the shelves or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so he thought, well, if they can do it, then I can do it. So he thought, well, this is a great way of, a really exciting, interesting way of trying to mitigate what is a massive, massive problem. And he's no brewer himself. He's a food waste activist, but no brewer. So he then started working with brewers in order to, create this amazing recipe, which involves adding surplus bread into a brew in order to produce award-winning beer.
That's awesome. And where do you collect the bread from?
So our supply chain involves taking bread from industrial bakeries and factories. Sandwich factories, basically, because it's a little known fact. When people think of bread waste, they think of huge skips of bread that's already been on the shelves in supermarkets and has just lived out its shelf life and gets thrown in a bin. Now, that is a huge issue, no question there. But what a lot of people don't know about is that in the production of sandwiches, particularly, say, here in the UK, you can go to any supermarket and there'll be shelves full of fresh, made-to-go sandwiches that people will buy and take home. Now, those are made of sliced white and brown bread, and they're never going to have the crusts on them. I'm sure you can just sort of imagine. You think of a supermarket store shelf. You see those kind of sandwiches in those triangular boxes, and they're never going to have crusts on them. So you have to start thinking to yourself, what happens to all of that? Now, in the production of all of that sliced bread in those industrial scale bakeries, they just throw away all of the crusts because they have no commercial value. And so what we do is we give them a use for that basically otherwise discarded bread. And so they send that to us, these large scale industrial bakeries in the UK. They ship them up to our brewery in Yorkshire, and we begin brewing out of them. And what that does is not only, obviously, it saves the bread from going to waste, it drastically reduces the bakery's carbon footprint,
Mm-hmm.
which is incredible. But also, it's actually cheaper for them than just throwing the bread away because of the costs tied to sending tons and tons of surplus bread into landfill.
Really?
So it's a real win-win situation both for us and for them. So they take all of that bread, and instead of it going to the bin, it goes up to us and we brew beer out of it. The basic idea.
I'm a little surprised that it would be cheaper for them to ship it to you, but is that because you're so close to them and the landfill is further away?
No, not necessarily. It's just I'm not sure if this is the case in America, but in Europe and certainly in the UK, the amount of tax involved in sending tons and tons of food waste into landfill means that it's actually cheaper for them just to give it to us, basically. I mean, either way, breadcrumbs are quite a cheap commodity that can be resold, but at the moment they're not. So much of it just ends up going in the bin. And this is fresh bread as well. Interestingly, it actually more or less gets into our brews faster than it gets on the shelf, because the other kind of misconception is that it's normally stale bread, but it's not. It's actually extremely fresh. It's fresher than you would normally buy it in a supermarket, interestingly.
Yeah. Wow, that's awesome. Okay, so you collect the bread from these factories. So sandwiches are made, the heels of the loaves are shipped to you. You make beer, and then what happens to the bread afterwards? Is it gone, or is it like a mush, like that porridge you were talking about?
Oh, it's inside the beer. There's the equivalent of a slice of bread in every bottle of beer we've ever brewed.
Wow, that is really cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the brewing process in general is a very circular one. Almost nothing gets wasted. The only stuff that has the potential to be wasted there is water, but I mean, there are ways in which you can reuse that. You can take the water from that, use it to fertilize crops and so on. you basically, it is reusable. It's not totally wasted. The other part of it is the spent grain. Now, spent grain is basically the husks of the malted barley after they've been put through the mash tun. But actually, those are an extremely rich source of energy and can be used to make fuel. In the case of our brewery, which is on a farm in Yorkshire, they feed it to the farmyard animals.
Oh,
but
good.
you can make it into all sorts of things. For example, I'll give a very quick plug if I can just remember the name. I think it's called Regrained. There's an energy bar company in the States where you are, which uses spent grains as the source of their kind of energy bar. So they take the spent grains from brews and they make that into a kind of energy bar. And it's delicious. I've tried it myself.
Wow. And is there still health benefits of the spent grain?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it is basically just a source of energy. It's had some of the sugar taken out of it, but there's still quite a lot left. It's not, it doesn't completely drain. So there is a lot of energy in there. As I said, you can make fuel out of it, either for, industrial fuel or just fuel for people, basically.
Right. Right. Yeah. So when I get beer here, sometimes I can go to a microbrewery and get what we call a growler. I'm not sure if you call it a growler there. It's like a big.
Oh yeah, we do. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. It's a big jug. Do you guys have those, or are you just doing like the small beer bottles that traditionally we're familiar with?
So I am a huge advocate of growlers. I really wish that growlers were a bigger thing in the UK. They are starting to become more well known. A lot of microbreweries here, or even larger craft breweries, for example, Brewdog have started introducing growlers that you can buy and then refill in their tap rooms. Lots of other craft breweries do that. We don't necessarily do it ourselves because all the beer that we're currently shipping out for the moment, there are plans to expand this down the line, certainly, in fact, almost imminently. But for the moment, in the UK at least. In the US, actually, we're in cans, but in the UK, it's in bottles and kegs.
I didn't know you could get your beer in the US.
Oh yeah, no, we're a smaller operation, but we're based out of New York. Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. And so I'm a big fan of the growlers too, because you can just return them. And unfortunately, what I do see happening with some of the I'm a Canadian, by the way. I'm calling you from Canada.
Sure.
But what I see is that the breweries start with growlers. And then as they get bigger and scale up, then they go to cans. So they kind of
right. I see. Okay.
Yeah, which is too bad because then, I'm zero waste. So I like to bring in my growlers and get them filled up if I can.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm also a huge fan of that. I mean, whenever we have the opportunity to, obviously, when I go to other breweries, for example, I love to use a growler if there's one on offer there. For us, I mean, it's because we are a nationally distributed beer here in the UK. So we're being sold in supermarkets nationwide, such as Waitrose and Tesco, and the Co-op we're being sold in London. We also sell online. We do not sell internationally. And what I mean by that is that we never ship internationally because there's a huge amount of energy expenditure in that, which we don't agree with. So point of fact is we are available in other countries like the US, South Africa, Brazil, Iceland, very small operations, but that involves working with a local brewery. And sort of to go back to what you were saying about what microbreweries do in terms of scaling up, now everything we do is contracted. And the reason for that is because we kind of want as many breweries as possible doing what we're doing. So we're almost a proof of concept, if anything else. Like the brewery that we brew with is called Wold Top Brewery. They're an incredible brewery. They don't just brew us. Obviously, they brew their own. They brew their own beers, which they distribute at least around the north of England. I believe actually they also distribute nationally. But we ourselves, we brew with them on contract basis, and that's the case with any country we expand into. And as I said, the reason for that is because we want to be able to kind of take our model and move it and kind of introduce it to as many breweries as we can. So we don't kind of tie ourselves down into having our own brewery. We focus much more on just the idea, and that's why we brew. Though we're based in London, we actually brew in the north of England.
That's very smart.
And I mean, one thing I will add in terms of reusability is that all of our kegs are reused. Actually, we're part of a national keg network called Kegstar. They supply kegs to brewers, empty kegs, which are then filled up, sent to customers, and once they're drained, Kegstar collect those, wash them thoroughly, obviously, and then send them back out to the brewers again. So even though I'm afraid our bottles aren't 100% circular, the kegs are. thankfully.
So if someone has a brewery and they were interested in becoming more sustainable and using a program like yours, they could call Toast Ale and ask you to kind of come in and set up the network, kind of get the liaisons between the bread makers and you and the kegs. Like, is that how it works?
Oh, absolutely.
Nice.
Well, I mean, our recipe is open sourced. You can find that on our website. And for any key sort of budding home brewers out there, you can actually find our recipe for brewing beer out of surplus bread on our website. It's toastale.com/homebrew-recipe. But in terms of other craft breweries, what we tend to do is we do a lot of collaborations. Now, our head of collaborations is a very busy man. He's also an absolute beer enthusiast. And so he quite loves his job, really, because basically what he does is he gets to go to all of these incredible craft breweries in the UK and in fact abroad as well, and he kind of introduced that arrangement with them. It's not something, often it actually has become a kind of a key element of the brewery afterwards, but what our stake in it is basically we form a collaboration brew between the brewery and a local bread supplier. So normally it's an artisanal bakery or something similar, or possibly a food bank, which supplies a lot of surplus bread to the brewery. The brewery brews an incredible beer out of it, and I mean, we work with some really, really incredible breweries because our normal range is very kind of straight down the line. It's lagers, pale ales, just the normal stuff. But we've had incredible stouts, porters, sours, kvasses, everything that have been done by other breweries that have kind of taken our model and done their own spin on it. And all of the profits normally for those collaborations go to charity afterwards. Now, some breweries have actually taken that and they've taken that recipe and just gone with it. So they've kept the relationship going, which is exactly what we're trying to achieve. So yeah, no, precisely. We do this all the time, basically. Yeah.
And that it must be a big selling point. Like, do breweries report back to you and saying, since we started making Toast Ale, we've seen our sales go up by X amount? Is it something that is being very, very successful? Oh,
absolutely. I mean, so what brewing with surplus bread does is it does two very important things. I mean, it does a lot more than that, but as far as I see it, two of the very important things it does is obviously it's extremely attractive for a consumer base, especially of my generation, like your generation as well, millennial generation, which are increasingly kind of interested in sustainability and becoming very, very conscious of their purchasing habits, their daily lifestyles, trying to become much more waste conscious, caring more about their carbon footprint, all the rest of it. So our product and any beers brewed the same way instantly become much more attractive to a consumer base like that. The other thing it does is it actually kind of switches a lot of people who aren't necessarily as sustainably conscious onto the idea of being sustainably conscious through just drinking exceptional beer. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's one of the reasons why, as I said, our beers are very simple lagers, pale ales, etc., because we just want to we're not gearing ourselves toward just the craft beer enthusiasts. We want everyone who loves a good beer, and it's great beer. Like everyone who likes a beer, even people who don't like beers seem to like our beers quite a lot. So, and they try the beer, and we say to them, "How does it taste?" They say it's delicious, and I say, "Well, this beer is actually helping to fight food waste." And they say, "Oh, that's incredible." And then suddenly you get people like much more into the idea of being sustainably conscious with your purchases, with this, that, and the other, through something as enjoyable as enjoying a nice cold beer. So, yeah, there's two sides of it, and both of it help certainly to drive sales.
That's very great. So I try to focus on a lot of businesses on the podcast because I believe that businesses are the problem and they're also the solution. So it's very nice to hear that this is doing well and that you're so big. It seems like you're all over the world. So that's really great. And Lawrence, what do you do personally in your own life to decrease your waste? Are you very eco-conscious?
I'm extremely food waste conscious. I'll tell you that much. I mean, in terms of I'm a cyclist. I don't drive. I mean, to be honest, not many people in London drive because it's just not viable here. It's too expensive, and there are extremely like expensive carbon emissions laws that are being implemented, even more so than already. We have congestion charges in the center of our city, but even more stringent ones are coming in very, very soon to make it very, very expensive to sort of have high emissions vehicles in the middle of London. So I've been a cyclist for many years, because I went to university in London, and so I began cycling as a commute then, and I still do it now. It's a great source of exercise. It's lovely when the weather's gorgeous here like it is at the moment, but more importantly, even when it isn't like that, it basically does heavily lower my carbon footprint because, I'm not driving, I'm not taking the public transport or anything like that. So that's one thing. The other side is I am, yes, very, very food waste conscious. I try never to throw food away. I've got, my flatmates would 100% attest to this, and roll their eyes probably, because I've got things like, I've got a whole shelf, in my kitchen just covered in jars, which I've saved, which I sort of use to keep various bits and pieces in that I almost never throw away. Whatever meal it is, I'll never throw like sort of half a packet of anything away. Everything ends up in a jar. And my freezer is absolutely chock full of bread, which I've sort of sliced up because there's only one of me that seems to eat all the bread in the house. So I just take all of our bread, slice it up, and just throw it into the freezer. So yeah, there is a freezer full of bread in my house. There's always food being saved here and there, and so that in that way I tried to do my bit just to mitigate the food waste issue and also just be as ecologically conscious as I possibly can be.
Oh, good. And that's a good tip too, if you're freezing bread, to cut it up first. So that way each morning or each day you can just take out 2 pieces. Because if you put a whole chunk in the freezer, you can't do it. So yeah, and storing food is a big thing. And I feel like our generation, a lot of us have lost the ability to save food properly or to manage our food. Like you buy a big pack of spinach and you can't eat it all. It's like, well, you can do different things. You can cook it and freeze it. You can have friends over. There's lots of different ways of dealing with it, right? And I think it's something we should all be looking into. And I think our listeners are going to be very happy to hear this episode, because if they're like me, they like beer. I'm a big beer fan. My favorite is a blonde Hefeweizen or nice. Like a Belgian or a white. I like those the best. Do you have a favorite?
I'm a man for very extremely pungent, alcoholic, hoppy IPAs myself. Okay. I like a very, very strong hoppy IPA, which it kind of smacks me a bit and just makes me really notice I'm drinking something strong. I'm a big fan of strong taste, very strong black coffee, very strong beer, all of that. So
that's like my
very
least
spicy food.
I love spicy food, but my least favorite is the super hoppy beers. But IPAs are the most popular ones that I see people drinking all over here. So cool. Well, there's a big brewery area right where I live. It's called Prince Edward County, and there's a lot of breweries in that area. So maybe one of them will pick up the toast ale method and start doing that too, because food waste is a huge problem. It's a big source of landfill and methane and lots of bad things. And you guys use I saw a pyramid of food waste. It's like the best things to do that go up the pyramid. And I think it's from the documentary Wasted with Anthony Bourdain. Do you know the pyramid I'm talking about?
I certainly know the documentary Wasted, because our founder also featured very prominently on it. If you've seen Wasted, then you may remember quite a well-spoken, foppish gentleman who was with an English accent. That is our founder, who was talking quite passionately about the issues with sort of the supermarket supply chain and the amount of food that gets wasted in that.
And what's the founder's name again? It's
Tristram Stewart.
Tristram Stewart. Yeah, very cool. Yeah, it's a very, very good documentary and quite shocking and gives us hope. Yeah.
One thing I'd like to add is that the profits from our business, we are a non-profit business. I just thought I'd add this in because Tristram himself kind of founded us on no profit. We are a social enterprise, a certified B Corporation. But the main reason we're non-profit is because all of our profits go into Tristram's charity, which is Feedback Global. And Feedback Global are a global food waste kind of charity that fights a kind of global, legislative campaign in order to counteract food waste. And one thing, if you're interested in infographics and food waste facts and all the rest of it, then a lot of it is available from their website, which is feedbackglobal.org.
Oh, very cool.
So check that out for more insights into both like causes of and solutions to food waste.
Yeah. The pyramid I was talking about was like, there's one of the levels is to feed it to animals. One of the levels, I think the last one might be compost.
Big idea, yeah.
Yeah, like that sort of thing. So yeah, it's composting is integral to living a zero waste life because we eat food every single day. Therefore, we're going to have some food waste, and it really, really reduces garbage. I can't imagine not composting anymore. Do you guys have a composting, like a curbside pickup in London, or are you able to compost at your house?
Oh yeah, we certainly do.
Oh, good.
I can at home. Yes,
Yeah.
I'm fortunate enough to sort of live in a block with a communal garden that does have a compost, that we use just for our own garden. But also, my local borough in London does, and I think most boroughs in London do as well. Is basically does have a food waste disposal service. So yeah, we get our biodegradable bags and we fill them up with food waste very rapidly at my house because people eat a lot of food. So you get things like bones and so on just ending up in the bin, and banana skins and whatnot. We fill those up. We get them sent off by our council, and they basically put them into food waste disposal where they can be reused for various purposes.
Good. That's very, very good to hear. Well, we do have a lot of listeners in the UK, so I hope that they try some of your beer soon, and I think that they'll be happy to hear about this. So thank you very much, Lawrence, for taking the time to speak with me today. I'm very excited about your project. I learned so much. I just thought you were a brewery, to be honest. I didn't know that it was a not-for-profit and there was a charity involved, and that you were going out to breweries, which is such a better model, because then it reduces transportation costs, right? So this is all just great. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're more than welcome. I mean, I'm afraid we're not yet in Canada, although fingers crossed one day we will be if we can find a brewery up there who are interested. But for now, I mean, if you're ever in the East Coast and soon to be the Midwest of the States or anywhere in the UK, then, then toast will be there in some shape or form. So make sure you give it a try. It's delicious.
Well, one thing, so if we're at a brewery, will there be like a sign, or is it on the label? Like, how do we know where Toast Ale is?
Well, I mean, Toast itself is a brand, so it is available kind of on the shelf. You can see it's got a big name on it. But other breweries that are doing what we're doing, it tends to have our logo on it if it's something we've been involved with.
Okay, cool.
But I mean, that's not just the case. There are lots of breweries. As I said, this is not something that we invented. In fact, Babylon, I said the Brussels Beer Project gave Tristram the idea, and obviously they were inspired by ancient practices. So there are bread beers everywhere. I mean, just look out and know that, and just and if you see one, then, it's just a thought that's involved. I mean, how did they get that bread? Is there a sort of circular, sustainable story behind that beer? And I mean, if you said you love breweries, which is great. I love breweries too. I love visiting breweries. There are hundreds and thousands actually in the UK. It's incredible, but especially in London, we're spoiled for the number of amazing world-class breweries we have. And one thing that is always kind of nice to think about is, you go in there and you can just ask them, do they have any ideas around sustainability? I mean, where do they source their materials from? What about maybe the energy expenditure or the kind of the use of the spent grains from their beer? I mean, and, some of them may already have thought about this. Some of them may not have. Some of them, it may already be part of their process for economic reasons. They weren't even aware it was, more ecological or sustainable to be doing what they're doing. But it's always worth asking. So, I mean, you can, as I said, you can find us in places all over the UK, just our beer itself, all over the UK, and, soon to hopefully we'll be conquering the whole of the US as well. Maybe one day Canada, fingers crossed, but other places like South Africa, Brazil, Iceland, and soon to be parts of Europe as well, hopefully. But in general, just keep a lookout for bread beers. They do exist all over the world, and it's a wonderful thing that we're doing. But we just want everyone to do what we're doing. So, spread the love yourself.
Awesome. I look forward to trying it. That's Lawrence Speelman from the UK. He works for Toast Ale. If you like our show and want to help save the world from all this trash we're consuming, please consider donating to the Zero Waste Countdown. You can become a patron on Podbean, you can find me on Patreon, or you can donate right on the website, zerowastecountdown.com. And if you're interested in seeing a photo of our guests, you can check us out on Instagram. That's _waste_countdown. And if you want to email me, it's laura@zerowastecountdown.com. Thank you for listening, everybody. Thanks to all our listeners in America, Canada, Australia, Germany, the UK, and wherever else you may be tuning in from. Together, we're going to change the world.
Change starts now.
This is the Zero Waste Countdown Podcast.